It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Clarence Page. Clarence Page is 1989 Pulitzer Prize winner for commentary. He is a columnist syndicated nationally by Tribune Media Services and a member of the Chicago Tribune's editorial board. Clarence is also a regular contributor of essays to the News Hour with Jim Lehrer and has been a regular on the McLaughlin Group, NBC's The Chris Matthews Show, ABC's Nightline, and BET's Lead Story news panel programs. His awards include a 1980 Illinois UPI Award for Community Service for an investigative series titled The Black Tax, and the Edward Scott Beck Award for Overseas Reporting in 1976. He also received Lifetime Achievement Awards from the National Society of Newspaper Columnists, the Chicago Headline Club, and the National Association of Black Journalists. In 1992, he was inducted into the Chicago Journalism Hall of Fame. Clarence was a reporter, producer, and community affairs director at WBBM-TV from 1980 to 1984. And before that, he was a reporter and assistant city editor for the Chicago Tribune, during which time he participated in a 1972 task force series on vote fraud, which also won a Pulitzer Prize, so I think he has Pulitzer ways. His book, Showing My Color, Impolite Essays on Race and Identity, was published in 1996 by HarperCollins. Clarence was born in Dayton, Ohio, and grew up in Middletown. He began his journalism career as a freelance writer and photographer of the Middletown Journal and Cincinnati Enquirer at the age of 17. He graduated from Ohio University, see, I got that in there, with a Bachelor of Science in Journalism in 1969. He has received honorary degrees from Columbia College in Chicago, Lake Forest College, Chicago's Theological Seminary, John Marshall School of Law, among others. Please join me in welcoming Clarence Page.
Thank you. I've just violated the first rule of public speaking. I dropped my microphone. But in case, I'll let the technicians worry about that. I am delighted to be here. I'm really honored to be here. And thank you so much for using my high school yearbook picture there. I appreciate that greatly. The advantage to being a columnist is you can stay forever young, as Bob Dylan would say. And I also just mentioning the great Ohio University, go Bobcats, I have to give some thanks to land-grant universities in general because thanks to the land-grant university system, I was able to move up from the working class to the middle class. I had the resources to do it. This week, you may have noticed we had an election, and some of these issues of class and the opportunity gap, especially for those who do not have some schooling beyond high school, became a central issue. And I've been writing about this for years, and I am glad I've said if Donald Trump didn't do anything else good, he brought this issue to the forefront. He brought visibility to people whose plight has been invisible for too long. Some of you have read the book Hillbilly Elegy, or you've heard of it, and I want to commend that book. The young man who wrote it grew up in Middletown, and grew up he spent his winters in Middletown, his summers in Kentucky, where his good Scots-Irish family was rooted and found opportunity in the coal mining area. My family was from Alabama, and found opportunity there in Middletown, just like his family did. And that was in the day when we still had a strong industrial base in the country. And the thing about his generation and mine, he's 30 years behind me. I came out of Middletown High School in 1965. when there were like 5 paper mills. We had a robust steel mill. We had all kinds of industry all up and down I-75. And today, very little of that is left, along with the opportunities. And he spells that out quite well in the book. And this is why I, over the years, have said education is my #1 issue, because that's the way people find opportunity. That's how people make the American dream work. And that's a little bit off my topic today, but I had to get that in there, because it's just hanging such a pregnant way in the air. We talked about these issues of campus speech, academic freedom, about people having the ability to feel comfortable on campus, people from diverse backgrounds. This all came up before Election Day, and now in recent days, it's taken on a new urgency. All of these issues have. And so I'm very much humbled by your invitation, and anyone who's actually seen me on McLaughlin Group knows that humility is not an emotion I'm intimately familiar with. But I've learned in Washington you don't get anywhere by being shy. In any case, so many of you have heard that Dr. John McLaughlin left us, passed away here a couple of months ago. And that was something that's really saddening for all of us. After 34 years on the air without his ever missing a program, his show had become more than just a TV talk show. It was a lifestyle choice for so many Americans. I've learned this. I thought we were kind of old hat in this day of 24-hour talk shows and all, but folks have been sending us emails talking about how my father made me watch your show when I was 7 years old. I've been watching it ever since. And that means something. I think his passing during this year's presidential campaign season caused me to reflect on the legacy of the group and its era in ways that pertain directly to what we're talking about today, the quality of civil discourse, particularly on the university campus. As I was writing a memorial column about John, a surprising question came to my mind. Are we to blame for the rise of Donald Trump? I say that because, despite the program's popularity, or maybe because of it, numerous people would criticize us from time to time for being what my grandmother used to call the shouting show. As in, are you going to be on the shouting show again this weekend? Yes, Grandma. It's a lot of fun. Besides, as my late friend Gene Siskel, a movie critic, said, I go to see the bad movies so you don't have to. Other critics who preferred more sedate talk shows like the NewsHour or Washington Week would say that we were to civil discourse what mud wrestling is to the Olympics. Well, we can't all be Meet the Press. Besides, we had some of the highest ratings on PBS, where they aren't supposed to care about ratings, and we even gained a small corner in pop culture. I knew I had it made when I was lampooned with the rest of the group in my favorite publication from my childhood, Mad Magazine. Scored lots of cool points with my son and his 5th grade classmates at the time. I always theorized that McLaughlin conceived the program in the spirit of the guy who invented the demolition derby. While auto racing fans say they want to see an auto race, untold numbers of them really want to see a car crash. So why not give them a sport with nothing but car crashes? So it was in McLaughlin's case. I figured as much as people say they want to see a discussion, they really want to see an argument. Robust, passionate, and we were happy to give it to him. But it was not until Dr. McLaughlin's funeral that I learned from his close friends and family what he really had in mind. Instead of bringing in a changing panel of reporters, newsmakers, and spin doctors like the conventional talk shows, John had in mind a discussion in the spirit of a small group of friends with different points of view who get together once a week in a sidewalk cafe, say, and talk about what's going on in the world. And they talk, and yeah, they debate, they argue, passionately sometimes. But in the end, and this is important, they always leave as friends and say, see you next week. That friendship across partisan and cultural lines is the key, I think, to what brought people back each week. It's also what is too often missing in the avalanche of high-energy talk shows that have come along more recently, as well as in our general civil discourse these days. I have on cable TV, the internet, and other new media, which is what I'm using here, by the way, an iPad, which gets away from me every so often. So if I have a pause, that means a paragraph has just jumped into a whole new font. I mean, back in my day, we learned how to set type by hand. I don't know what this is all about. Anyway, cable TV, the internet, other new media, and more recent years, we see increasing specialization, and with it, increasing polarization. Whether from the right, the left, or the wobbly middle, you can now choose what version of reality you want. You can get through an entire day on various media without running into a single point of view that challenges your own, or takes you outside of your everyday world. Unless you want to put forth that special effort, sadly, too few people want to make that effort. By the way, I just ran into a guy in the lobby here who said, "Hey, I see you all the time on MSNBC and Fox. You watch both?" So, "Oh yeah, all the time." I said, "Thank you, sir. Bless you." Here we've got more media than one can imagine, far more than any one lifetime can cover, but why do people just limit themselves to the most narrow segment of it? Making that effort is where the academic world is supposed to be different. Yet today, the university, particularly including public universities, which by their nature are particularly accountable to a tax-paying public, faces a special challenge. How do you honor the need for academic freedom and free speech while also making sure that all students from a wide variety of backgrounds feel welcome and respected on campus? I can remember the early 60s when a new era of campus activism began with a proudly labeled free speech movement at Berkeley. Today's atmosphere is a little different. College students increasingly demand protected speech, or to be protected from words and ideas they don't like. Some of the more extreme examples I've run across include an online article from The New Yorker by Jeannie Suk last December that asks her fellow Harvard professors not to teach rape law, lest it cause students distress. In February, Northwestern professor Laura Kipnis wrote an essay in the Chronicle of Higher Education describing a new campus politics of sexual paranoia, as she puts it. Now, Laura Kipnis loves to be provocative, and that's part of what writing and communicating is about. But some people don't like to be provoked. In any case, she was subjected to a long investigation after students who were offended by the article filed Title IX complaints against her. Another professor, I should say, writing anonymously in Vox, described an atmosphere of hypersensitivity that led to the headline, quote, "I'm a liberal professor and my liberal students terrify me," unquote. Well, my students terrified me when I taught part-time too, but that's kind of a natural thing that they do. But there's apparently a little different sense of terror on the part of some faculty these days. And for that matter, comedians such as Chris Rock, Jerry Seinfeld, Bill Maher have quite loudly complained about how too many of today's college students can't take a joke. Springtime is becoming known in academic circles as disinvitation time, or similar titles, for all the commencement speakers who've had to be disinvited because of student objections to statements or actions those speakers have made or taken in the past. They can vary from Condoleezza Rice to a couple of people I want to mention, like at DePaul University in Chicago, a May appearance by right-wing wise guy, Milo Yiannopoulos, ended in a melee when audience members shouted him down and someone grabbed away the microphone. School officials denied a request to bring him back this fall and vetoed another conservative commentator, Ben Shapiro, formerly of Breitbart News, before he left in a dispute with its new editors, by the way, complaining that it had gone too far to the right. Anyway, both men are far-right showmen, kind of reminiscent to me of left-wingers I used to know, like Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, way back in my day, in the last century, as my son says. Such provocateurs provoke. They provoke the establishment. They get under the skin of their ideological rivals. DePaul administrators said they need time, lots of time, to contemplate how to react to such continuing controversies. The anecdotes abound, and increasingly, so do examples of pushback. I'm sure you've all heard of the University of Chicago this year famously welcomed the incoming class of 2020 with a widely quoted letter stating quite directly, quote, "You will find that we expect members of our community to be engaged in rigorous debate, discussion, and even disagreement. At times, this may challenge you and even cause discomfort. Our commitment to academic freedom means that we do not support so-called trigger warnings. We do not cancel invited speakers because their topics might prove controversial. We do not condone the creation of intellectual safe spaces where individuals can retreat from ideas and perspectives at odds with their own. On an upbeat note, it ends, "See you in September." Well, good for UC. I better say that. My wife grew up in Hyde Park. But the U of C's perspective is that all expression deserves protection as long as it doesn't pose a genuine threat or violate the law. If all ideas are not given a chance to be heard and properly rebutted and debated on the university campus, where can they be heard? Personally, I put Milo Yiannopoulos in that group that Hillary Clinton controversially described as a basket of deplorables, but let his ideas and antics stand or fall on their own merits or demerits. Don't make him a martyr by trying to punish him. Yet universities have an important mission, not to stand by and let students find or take care of themselves and sink or swim on their own without showing concern for the student's success. Even this exquisitely composed statement from the university, which was written with the assistance of Jeffrey Stone, one of the great legal scholars in this country, and it's on the UC Law School faculty, has its dissenters, and some of them very well argued. One black University of Chicago grad, Cameron Okeke, of the class of 2015, expressed the other side in an eloquent essay in Vox titled, "Safe Spaces Got Me Through College." Okeke, currently earning a master's in bioethics at Johns Hopkins, points out, "I never encountered places where I could run away from perspectives, but I did find spaces where people didn't question who I was." The university has been under Title IX investigation, he recounts, for their long history of ignoring marginalized populations. There have been episodes we have seen on other campuses, such as racist parties and costumes and questionable handling of sexual assault complaints. Quote, "If you don't have privileged identity, you don't have institutional support," writes Okeke. For him, the campus Office of Multicultural Affairs is a respite from occasions where he is questioned as if he's an expert on racial affairs or treated as if he's only there because of affirmative action. The safe spaces, he writes, give people the freedom to engage in such exchanges without being forced into a conversation they don't want to have. Now, maybe it's because I just love to talk, but I see nothing intimidating about conversations. But I do recognize that it's easier for some people than it is for others. I was fortunate enough to grow up in an integrated town, an integrated school system. I had friends of all races as long as they were black or white. But great friends who I still stay in touch with thanks to the magic of Facebook and class reunions, which are always a moment of truth, aren't they? But you know, the kind of situation that many students are dealing with as we try to broaden the net and get more kids into college, they come from a much wider variety of backgrounds. I mean, I grew up poor, or as my daddy used to say, "Son, we's po." We too po to afford the O and the R. But we were always rich in spirit. We're always rich in spirit. My parents are always thinking upward mobility. If I had to go to school with holes in my socks, they taught me deft ways of hiding the holes. So that I have always felt a great pride in the fact that I had a family and a community that supported me. Not everybody has all those supports that you see later in life are worth more than gold, but we have youngsters coming from all kinds of backgrounds. And so we want to try to make them as comfortable as possible when they first get there. And I advise students, hey, you know, it's okay to stick it with your comfort zones when you first get to the new environment. But you'll be cheating yourself if you don't get out of that comfort zone and get to meet some of these other kids, some of these other folks from other backgrounds and see where they're coming from, because you're not going to get rid of them. The country's getting more diverse. If you're going to make it, you need to know people from other cultures just like they need to know yours. I think as Okeke said, I think critics who say we can't take the criticism don't know that when you're born black, life really already is really hard. Universities have spent most of their history catering Pandering to one demographic of people, he said, quote, "A welcoming letter for new high school graduates when they are excited to be in this new, amazing, and intellectually stimulating environment is not a time to tell them what you do or don't condone. They tried to curb the trend, but they only fan the flames," unquote. These are the different perspectives we're dealing with. And I think we need to understand them all in order to come to realize what kind of a new century that we're in now. My personal feeling is that the university, we're really talking about three elements here on campus. We're talking about the students, the faculty, and the administration. I can understand the administration making a blanket free speech zone policy. That makes perfect sense. Individual faculty members, if they see a need to give trigger warnings in regard to certain material, at least give a heads up to their students, as we used to call it in the olden days, that's perfectly proper, in my view. That it is that teacher's classroom, and they're the ones who should be making the judgment. But it needs to be an informed judgment. So the more conversations we have, the more informed people can be. As Jeffrey Stone said, the letter, of which he helped to compose, that it was misread by a lot of people, including us in the media. Hard as that is to understand, that we in the media might not get it right, but I'm willing to recognize nobody's perfect. In any case, he says the university is fine with trigger warnings in safe spaces as long as the first isn't mandatory or the latter exclusive. As long as the trigger warnings aren't mandatory and the safe spaces are not exclusive. Well, that's perfectly reasonable to me. I think at the same time, white students who might be put off by the fact that maybe the black students have something to talk about and don't want to necessarily be joined by students who they don't know, who may be well-meaning enough, and this has happened sometimes. Students are told, why don't you get out and meet kids of other races? And they go and sit down at the table, and other kids say, what are you doing here? You know? It could be kind of abrupt sometimes. It's the sort of thing that needs to be handled properly so that you don't just take people for granted in a way that stereotypes others as just, boy, they just can't wait to talk to me, you know. In any case, the letter, the U of C letter, says both of these are problematic concepts in an institution committed to academic freedom and to robust public disclosure. It should not be misconstrued as saying that the trigger warnings should be prohibited, even if faculty members want to offer them, or the safe spaces, which is a very ambiguous term, are always inappropriate. Sometimes they are. Much of this debate has been inflamed and distorted by a shortage of good information and an overabundance of alarmism, particularly in 2016, when we have 24/7 media that are desperate to get an audience and eyeballs to watch them or read them. Sometimes things do get blown out of proportion. In fact, trigger warnings and similar policies actually preserve and protect academic freedom as long as they are conducted by the teacher, not mandated by the school or university. That comes from Jeffrey Stone again. Anecdotal evidence suggests that many traumatized students actually prefer to normalize their classroom participation, meaning they prefer to participate in the same classroom experience as their fellow students and not be set aside from being exposed to something that other people think might be harmful to them. There have been some very interesting pieces written, a widely argued article in the September issue of The Atlantic, I'm sure many of you read, by a lawyer, Greg Lukianoff of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE, and social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. They use the term vindictive protectiveness. Vindictive protectiveness. This is a term that really talks about something that troubles me. It's not that people are called out for being offensive, it's when they're called out in a punitive manner over what are essentially innocent offenses. That's what are called microaggressions. Another term I love, word man that I am. And when I first heard about microaggressions, I thought, microaggressions, that means it's small, right? If it's that small, why fuss over it? But it is small but large in the eyes of a lot of people. But I can think of countless occasions when I have run across what some people would call microaggressions back when I was in college, back in the Stone Age. I'll never forget going to an afternoon football game with my roommate, Jim Tremblett from Washington Courthouse, Ohio, a town even smaller than mine, if that was possible. I was the first black person he had known intimately. He was the first white person I'd ever lived with in the same dorm room. And we had a lasting friendship that still goes on today, but I'll never forget the day we came back from an afternoon football game, and Jim took off his sunglasses, looked in the mirror, saw his nose was like Rudolph the Reindeer red, and said, "Boy, look at that nose. You're sure lucky you haven't got to worry about this." And I said, "Oh, yeah?" And I took off my sunglasses, and he saw I had a tan line across my eyes. He was so shocked. I'll never forget that look. I mean, if a man's jaw could drop and hit the floor, it happened right there. And as he stuttered his way through, saying, "Clarence, I don't mean to be offensive or anything, but I didn't know black people tanned." It's okay, Jim, you're not alone. I could not fault my roommate, Buddy, for ignorance that comes from our segregated society. He didn't grow up around black people. I grew up around white folks, so I knew what tanning lotion was. They didn't all know about cocoa butter, but they learned. This is how we share. This is how we expand our horizons. But I think that what troubles me is the punitive attitude. I have held the belief, it's Page's law, that one should not be punished for something that is racist, sexist, etc., some offense committed out of pure ignorance, especially on the campus. What is the campus for but to treat ignorance with knowledge, with information? And that is the best way to deal with this sort of thing. Milo Yiannopoulos, bless his heart, is not a stupid man, not an ignorant man. He's an educated man. He just loves to go out and tick people off. That's a different ballgame. But nevertheless, he's someone that students are curious about. I'm troubled by censoring him ahead of time, preemptively, because we're afraid of ideas. One should not be afraid of ideas on the campus. Now, I know there are those who disagree with me, and that's okay. I'm lucky to be in the business of giving my opinion and trying to stir up some dialogue. What troubles me is when people just get up and walk out. That happened to me down at the University of North Carolina recently. I was invited, they were nice enough to invite me down to lead a town hall down there on race relations because they've had problems there at the on the campus. I did this at the University of Michigan, too, a few weeks before, and it was smooth as silk. I was surprised by how well it went and really gratified. At the University of North Carolina, as soon as they announced my name, the local black student organization marched in and took over the stage. I'm sure my mom and dad are in heaven looking down saying, "Now it's your turn." For indeed, the generation gap has opened up behind me. And I gave the students the stage for about 45 minutes as they read off not just their list of demands, but a list of demands from Missouri, a list of demands from UNC in 1967, including a request to bring Stokely Carmichael to the campus, which would be hard to implement now. In any case, the only thing that disappointed me was when it was over, they just marched out. I wanted them to stay. Engage in dialogue with everybody else there. But I know how it is. That sort of thing used to happen when I was a student as well. The great thing about being a student is that you know it's the last time in your life when you're going to know all the answers. It's only after graduation that you learn the questions. A lot of them. In any case, we have more people to speak here today. I, trained as I am in years of putting 500 pounds of information into a 5-pound bag, I can only scratch the surface at this point, so I hope we can engage in more dialogue here today and talk some more about not just the situations that we do have on campus now with speech and academic freedom, but also how we can approach it here in the future. And thank you all once again very much for inviting me. But before you give your gracious applause, let me just say something that I think it's very appropriate right now as we near 30 years since Dr. King's assassination. In fact, 50 years, excuse me. This year, 50 years ago, his last speech before the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, he said something that I think is very appropriate for us today. Near the end, he said, "We all have a task, and let us go out and do it with a sense of divine dissatisfaction. Let us be dissatisfied as long as we have a wealth of creeds and a poverty of deeds. Let us be dissatisfied as long as the outer city of wealth and hope is separated from the inner city of poverty and despair. Let us be dissatisfied until the lion and the lamb can lie down together, and none shall be afraid. Let us be dissatisfied until that day that from every city hall and every governor's mansion, justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Let us be dissatisfied until that day when there will be no black power, when there will be no white power, but there will only be God's power and human power." Martin Luther King, ladies and gentlemen. As I think of those words, I'm reminded of the more modern philosopher Woody Allen, who said, "The lion shall lie down with the lamb, but the lamb won't get much sleep." And this is where we are today on our campuses. There are those who are not sleeping well, and we should try to help bring them comfort and the tools, the information that can help them to be able to cope with a changing world and change it all for the better. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
This is your chair. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Clarence, for that very thoughtful and important address. We really appreciate it, and thank you for joining us in the panel. My name is Millie Garcia, president of Cal State Fullerton, and I am honored to moderate this panel. My bios will be very short because we want to use the time to engage in conversation. Joining us is Howard Gilman, Chancellor of the University of California, Irvine. Bernadette Montoya, Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment at New Mexico State University, and Mariah Watson, immediate past Student Body President of the University of California, Davis, who recently graduated from UC Davis and was the campus's first African-American Student Body President, and now serves as Executive Director of Lightwave Education. So to begin, the first question: as we are experiencing institutional conflicts or crisis on campus, how do we create opportunities, as Clarence said, to invite students to engage with those with whom they disagree as we honor free speech and cultivate safe and inclusive environments? Bernadette?
Thank you very much. Certainly this was not a crisis at our campus, but I believe that the example that was set, certainly by our Chancellor, Gary Carruthers, and others, was profound, even in its simplicity. We had an incident a couple of years ago on campus when a student felt that his exercising of his First Amendment rights were violated. And he was subsequently arrested and challenged our policy on freedom of expression. And our Chancellor felt it was very important to gather the community to revisit our policy. Oftentimes when those policies are challenged, it is an opportunity to go back and to look at that and to decide if changes need to be made. What was important about his directive to a committee that was formed was not only did it involve the typical stakeholders, including our Dean of Students, faculty, students that were part of our student government and others on our campus community. The most important part was that he invited those that were testing our policy, attorneys who were representing students who had felt that their rights were violated, and the students themselves who felt that way as well. What came of that was a complete rewrite of our freedom of expression policy. which actually opened up opportunities for more dialogue and created more open space, safe space, and as somebody said today, brave space for students to demonstrate and to express their concerns. I served in somewhat of an advisory capacity to our Dean of Students, and the important part, I think, about this process was that people had an opportunity to engage in that dialogue. And as a student affairs professional, part of my responsibility is to ensure that those policies are followed and that we create that opportunity for students. But it's also important in my role as a student affairs professional to help students understand what their opportunities are and to be able to feel free to express themselves and to be able to get involved in that discourse. It sometimes does make us uncomfortable, but certainly a very important part of a university community.
So let's get the student perspective. Mariah.
I'd love to. So what I'm hearing you say, and I think it's really where the issue, or where the rubber meets the road, is that students in our educational experiences, we want to feel heard. And that's not necessarily just being in a room like this and just venting our frustrations at you, or even taking over a speaker's opportunity to speak at a campus. Part of it is we want to see action-backed speaking. And so I think what you're talking about here is valuing what they're talking about, valuing that we are a generation who is not going to tolerate the microaggressions. We're not going to tolerate the same level of things. We're going to speak out. We're going to protest. We're going to write op-eds because we want to feel safe on our campuses or be in an educational environment in which we feel brave enough to speak about what's happening in our world and how it's personally impacting us.
So Chancellor Gilman, you have something to add?
You know, the biggest thing we should do is stop making certain mistakes. There are students who have raised fundamental questions about what an inclusive learning environment, a safe learning environment is like, who have been condescended to, treated as coddled, in ways that I think are outrageous. I mean, there has been a fundamental transformation in the last few years on our campuses and hopefully slowly in our country about how what used to be taken for granted, which is fine, isn't okay any longer. And for a while that was advocates focusing on sexual assault and sexual violence. And I think our campuses in our country have been transformed for the better over the last couple of years because there's a heightened level of sensitivity about what's okay and what's not okay. And so we've had students who have been exercising their free speech rights who have been criticized for assaulting free speech rights in ways that I think are not helpful. If moving forward we aren't absolutely listening to the concerns of students about a safe environment, about their reporting of the psychological harm associated with hateful and intolerant speech, we're never going to win over this generation of students with an argument, an abstract argument about free speech and academic freedom. The University of Chicago letter was wrong, and it wasn't wrong because it was defending free speech and academic freedom. It was wrong because it was too dismissive of the notion of safety on campus. It was wrong because it was too dismissive of faculty who may want to sensitize students to challenging material. And so we need to avoid that mistake. But at the same time, I think while we're finding our voice when it comes to inclusiveness and diversity, we don't always speak with the same strength when we defend sometimes hard things to defend, which are associated with academic freedom and freedom of speech. And as long as we are finding that balance, we'll be fine. But if we don't teach people about the importance of academic freedom and free speech, because every generation needs to be taught it anew, and if we don't take seriously the concerns of students, those are the two mistakes that'll prevent us from finding that place where we all have to end up.
Clarence, would you like to add anything, or?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I appreciate how the atmosphere has improved in recent years, and not just on the campus, in the workplace too.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first came to the Chicago Tribune, fresh off the campus, there was no concern about my sensitivities as a young reporter, right? You know, it was more like the stereotype you see in the movies there, where, varying from the front page to Superman and Jimmy Olsen. We knew that, but it was more of a Marine Corps boot camp kind of an approach.
Yeah, that's right.
Nowadays, it's a much better environment now because mentoring is encouraged, sensitivity to the fact that you've got a more diverse staff that comes from a lot of different backgrounds, and not only helping them to feel comfortable, I'll never forget, by the way, I was the second, pardon my digressions, I could take forever, but I have to say that I started my career in the 1960s under a program known as Urban Riots, because I happened to be majoring in journalism at a time when there were over 400 civil disturbances in this country, right? It was the late 60s. And so suddenly, all white newsrooms were suddenly looking for somebody they could send to the ghetto without looking too conspicuous. And so, while my classmates were lucky to have 1 or 2 job offers, I had 5. And I went, because I was the only black journalism major graduating that year who'd been there all 4 years. My buddy Monroe Anderson was the only one at the Indiana University that year. Northwestern didn't have any that year. And so, that's how things were. But when I first arrived at the paper, several people said, hey, we're against slavery. Yeah. That was important. The Chicago Tribune was the paper that endorsed Abraham Lincoln and was an abolitionist paper. And people wanted to be helpful. They wanted me to know they got a long tradition. So anyway, it's gotten better, okay? And I mean, part of this is because on the campus it's gotten better, and out on the work world they're learning.
On the other hand, as we say it's gotten better, the result of this presidential election has many of our students and families in fear.
I'm glad you brought that up.
We have students, undocumented, Muslims, African Americans, Latinos, all in fear of what is occurring or what may occur, and how does that hurt their freedom of speech? What do we do about that?
I'd love to speak on this. In the past 24 hours, I received a picture from my roommate. And I live in Sacramento, so not too far away from the UC Davis campus, and one of our PhD students lives there. And they posted a picture of a swastika drawn outside of our apartment. This is in the past 24 hours. So for me, when we talk about this generation in such a way where it is somewhat condescending, where we're considered whiners, or oh, we need thicker skins, or all these other things, UC Davis in the past 2 years, during my presidency, I saw 3 hate crimes that I had to respond to for multiple communities. So for me, when we're talking about freedom of speech on campuses, you also have to understand that mental health is a really big issue for our students. That when someone comes up to you and questions your role on campus, how you got here. I was joking earlier saying that a lot of people come up to you and they say, well, are you an athlete? How'd you get here? I'm like, I can't shoot a basketball to save my life, so that's not why I'm here. My academics are what keep me here. So I think in the wake of this, it's having that understanding that your students are going through a lot. That suicide and mental health on campuses is not something to laugh at and shy away from because you think that Facebook post is something they should easily dismiss. It's not dismissible. When it's in your classroom and a professor is talking about an issue, maybe they're talking about slavery, maybe they're talking about Reconstruction, and they show somebody lynched. I would appreciate a trigger warning in that classroom because I know that the multiple questions that are going to be asked afterwards by my peers are, how does that make you feel? Ooh, did your grandparents live? Do you know about this? Have you seen this before? As the black student, as the representative, as the single face in that classroom, tell me about your entire experience and how this makes you feel. That's a heavy weight and a heavy burden. So when we're talking about free speech and we're talking about how to support our students, yes, prioritize the dialogue. Prioritize the necessity for the free exchange of ideas. Be comfortable with uncomfortableness. Be brave enough to speak up. But part of that is preparing your students to engage in that. Students who have never had to be confronted with somebody who fundamentally disagrees with their existence. It's that real on the campus. Don't shy away from it. But part of it is, as administrators, as leaders of this campus, it is on you to help educate us, to treat the ignorance. And that happens in the classroom prior to coming to the institution, but it is not condescending your students for speaking up about what hurts them. What makes it harder to succeed in these educational institutions?
So we just heard the student experience. She's dynamic. We just heard her voice. How do we do this on our campus administrators? How do we set the stage?
Well, something I will share is this afternoon I had the great pleasure of spending a couple of hours with the student affairs professionals that are here today, my fellow vice presidents. And many of them shared stories about some of the huge challenges that they faced in this last week. Riots, defacing of buildings, suicides. Those were real examples of things that just happened this week. And I think that all of us can say that we have had activities on our campus this week to try to support our students, to honor their feelings, and to give them that place to come, to be able to express that regardless of where their feelings are, because they need to get that out. We had an activity on our campus on Thursday evening, and we had several students who came, and they needed to decompress, much like my colleagues and I did this afternoon, to share that and to honor that. And I think that's very important. And as you said, we can't be uncomfortable with that. While it may feel uncomfortable, we need to be open, and we sort of need to open ourselves up to have that dialogue.
I think I would recommend 3 very important things that campuses should be thinking about in the wake of the election. One is to make it as clear as possible that we are doubling down on a value that we all have, that we are creating communities, diverse communities of mutual respect, where people are bringing lots of backgrounds and experiences to bear on the most interesting and important questions facing our communities and our world. That is a model. We were created to be a model for a great republic. The republic depends on us. And let's not sugarcoat this election. This isn't just an election where one side felt that some people won and the other side felt that they won. The level of rhetoric in this campaign truly created threats and ignited a kind of hate. And we have to double down on us as an exemplar for the future of the country. So let's not be shy about standing for our principles of tolerance and mutual respect. But the lesson of the election was also that there's a lot of people in this country who feel as though their experiences, values, and interests are not being heard by the core institutions of this society. So we have to double down on reaching across the divide of divided opinion. And you need to do it in a way where it's safe, and I know that it's very hard in these circumstances to do it. But every other institution, core institution in American life, whether it's what remains of the political parties or what remains of the establishment media, know that they need to turn and they need to figure this out. Because this country is divided, and we need to be the exemplar of how you explore opportunities to create meaningful conversation within a condition of true diversity. And the last thing we need to do is remember our scholarly mission. There is a phenomenon happening in this country, but also in Western Europe, that is a phenomenon where the dislocation that we are seeing as a result of globalization and certain patterns of forced migration is leading, on the one hand, to opportunities for people, but it's also leading to a lot of anxiety. And we have to remember that democracies are fragile things. And there are authoritarian strands that we're seeing in a lot of these countries. And I think that universities that care about a scholarly mission of illuminating the world need to spend a bit more time thinking about the conditions that sustain democracy and the conditions that undermine democracy. Because we are going to be living with this churning for some decades to come, and universities need to make that a priority as part of their scholarly mission.
If I could just add a little bit there, I fully agree. This is one of the things that troubles me about political correctness on campus, and I hate the term because it implies only liberals are politically correct while conservatives are very politically correct as well. But the problem comes when people do. I don't want to call your generation coddled or spoiled or all those other things that are thrown at you. I've got a son to do that with. But the fact is that, remember last year when Emory College, or Emory University, some of the students were very upset because some graffiti of Donald Trump's name, just Trump 16, that's all it said, was viewed as hate speech. Now, if there's anything the First Amendment was written for, it's political speech. That's obviously what this is. But these students, it shocked them and educated me that they were shocked that somebody would write Trump's name in praise on the sidewalk. One thing about this week, and at the time I talked to Salman Rushdie, in fact, just coincidentally, because he was teaching at Emory. And if anybody knows something about free speech, it's Salman Rushdie. He loves the students there, and he said they're just young, they haven't been exposed that much, and they need to know. Well, I think everybody knows now just how popular Donald Trump is, and how strong this political correctness argument has been in the campaign as a subtext, not just for him, but for Ben Carson and some other people. But it really has a palpable strength to it, that has been able to, all of Donald Trump's sins, and so for the last count I saw was 270. Slate magazine does this. Just, you know, the kind of political incorrectness that other candidates would have been expelled already for. He won the daggone election. What does this tell you? There are a lot of people in the country who do feel left out. There are a lot of people who, coming from Middletown, Ohio, or coming from coal country, where I went to college there, over in Athens and all, they feel passed over, left out. The non-college whites have not had any appreciable increase in income over the last 50 years in real dollars. They have, in fact, I just saw a figure this morning about how the, well, in any case, the fact is, they have a lot to be upset about, and they're looking for scapegoats. It's just natural. And they see black folks as having improved at a faster pace than them, or at least getting more attention than they are. And so there's always been this subtext of race. Is that straight racism or racial resentment? To me, there's no difference. I mean, it's a dime's worth of difference, because if you are so resentful that you start scapegoating people for their ethnic group, then that is racism. But it's racism in response to a deeper feeling you have of frustration or what to do. That's why we need dialogue. That's why we need more speech on campus, not less. But so that, for one thing, black folks can learn more about diversity of white folks and poor whites. I happened to work for Upward Bound, War on Poverty program back in '67 in Appalachia, and 90% of our students were white. So I know there are more poor white people than poor black people in this country. But we colorized poverty in the mid-60s. Suddenly, we went from Appalachian whites being the symbols of President Johnson's war on poverty to Watts and Harlem and Chicago's West Side and Cleveland's Huff District, these black inner city areas, as being the symbols of poverty. So the whole debate's been distorted. That's why we need more dialogue.
So unfortunately, we only have time for one more
I'm afraid I'd do this.
question. So we talk about wanting more conversation and dialogue among our students, and yet there are students who are silent, regardless of political persuasion, regardless if they're feeling rage, anxiety, and fear. What advice do you give us, from each of you, very short, because I'm getting the hook, very short, what advice do you give each of us as we go back to our campuses? Last question. I'm going to start with you, and then we'll come down.
Okay, very quickly. By the way, my wife teaches at George Washington University. I went to a faculty party last night, and I talked about the same things you're talking about, the same kind of attacks, more than microaggression going on campus in the wake of the election. But I think one thing my wife learned when she started teaching online during the summer, how those silent students came out online who stayed silent when they were in a live classroom. And I think there's a clue there. If you can't get students to speak up in public, there are other avenues, other media where you can communicate. So that's something to think about.
Bernadette?
I would say that listening goes much more beyond what we hear. It's about what we see and what we observe in our students, watching their actions, whether it is acting out in anger or a fearful look, or even that quietness of a student. I think we have to be more aware, and we have to be willing to try to engage them in a way that is comfortable to them. And certainly your student affairs professionals are those folks that can recognize that.
Thank you.
Fundamentally, the point of a university is to allow incredibly talented young people to find their voice, and that every step of progress in the world has occurred not because we've silenced others, but because we've empowered people who previously have been silent. And that takes a lot of work, but the more people see their responsibility of finding that voice and using their critical capacity to maneuver through this realm of ideas, the more we will be going back to basics and doing the fundamental mission that we were created to do in the first place.
And Mariah.
So I echo all of those sentiments. I think that each of what they said is critical, finding the multiple means of how you reach your students. Not every single student is going to be the student on the quad or on your, with the huge sign that says, free tuition or whatever that is on your campus. That's the major issue. Not every student is out there. Some are working 2 to 3, 4, 5 jobs. That's not an understatement. That's not an overstatement in order to make ends meet. So I think it's finding them and meeting them where they're at. But for me as a student, I think it's what do you want them to talk about? Why are they talking? Because I feel that on certain college campuses, we do too much talking and there's not enough follow-up with what we're doing. See, I can talk to you for 5 hours and tell you exactly how I feel and how I'm impacted on my campus, but if I don't see my administration doing anything with what I've already told them, then I'm going to remain silent. And I'm going to take to the Facebook feeds, I'm going to take to a number of different things where I do feel validated in what I'm saying. Not validated as an agreement, but heard to the point where there's some action being created, action, reaction. I think that's necessary. So figure out what your goals are and why you want them talking in the first place.
Follow her career, everybody. Follow her. This has been an amazing, wonderful conversation. I think you'll agree with me that it's given us a lot to think about as when we go back to our campuses. Please join me in thanking this amazing panel.
Thank you.